I am Christina Evans, and I've spent the last 8 years breathing life back into instruments that others have given up for dead. But when I lifted that violin from Mrs. Henderson's estate collection this morning, something about it made my hands tremble. The wood was darker than it should be for an 18th century piece, Stradivarius-style construction, but the varnish held secrets. As I examined the sound holes under my magnifying lamp, I noticed something impossible. Tiny hinges, nearly invisible, along the interior ribs. "What the hell were you hiding?" I whispered to the silent instrument. My workshop door chimed as I carefully pried open what revealed itself to be a hidden compartment. Inside lay a rolled piece of parchment, old but not ancient. Before I could examine it, footsteps approached. "Christina? You in here?" I quickly closed the compartment and looked up to see Linda from the community center, her face flushed from the December cold. "We need to talk about the holiday program," she said, unwrapping her scarf. "I've got you paired with someone new for the kids' activities." Across town, Cameron Ross stood at her apartment window, watching snowflakes disappear into Lake Michigan's dark water. 3 years of oil rigs and offshore platforms had left her longing for something steady, something real. Milwaukee wasn't exactly the career move her colleagues expected, but damn, if she wasn't tired of sleeping in different beds every few months. Her phone buzzed. "Community Center Volunteer Assignment. Music and Arts Coordination," she read aloud. "With Christina Evans." She didn't know any Christina Evans, but after 3 years of working exclusively with men who thought emotions were engineering flaws, maybe it was time for a change. 2 hours later, I found myself in the community center's main hall. Surrounded by donation boxes and the chaos of holiday preparation, Linda pointed toward a blonde woman organizing art supplies with military precision. "Cameron, meet Christina." The woman turned and I felt something shift in my chest. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Like finding a missing piece of music you didn't know you were looking for. "So you're the instrument expert," she said, extending her hand. Blue eyes, calloused fingers, a grip that spoke of real work. "And you're the engineer who's going to help me turn 20 hyperactive kids into a functioning orchestra." Her laugh was honest, unguarded. "I've managed roughnecks on drilling platforms. How hard can 4th graders be?" We spent the next 3 hours planning activities, our conversation flowing between technical details and shared frustrations about working in male-dominated fields. When she described the engineering challenges of underwater construction, her whole face lit up. When I explained the mathematical precision required in instrument restoration, she listened like it actually mattered. "Coffee?" she asked as we finished organizing supplies. "I mean, to discuss the program." I nodded, though we both knew the program was perfectly planned already. Outside, snow had begun falling harder, turning Milwaukee's streets into a winter painting. As we walked toward the cafe on Brady Street, I couldn't shake the feeling that finding that violin and meeting Cameron Ross on the same day wasn't coincidence. It was December 15th, and I had no idea that in 9 months, everything about my life would be different. That the woman walking beside me, talking about ocean currents and structural integrity, would become the reason I'd stop looking for hidden compartments in everything. But first, there was coffee to drink and a mystery violin waiting in my workshop. The coffee shop hummed with afternoon energy, but Cameron and I had found a quiet corner, booth where our conversation had shifted from volunteer work to something more personal. Her hands wrapped around her mug like she was holding onto warmth itself. "You don't seem like the type to stay in one place long," I said, studying her face. 3 years on platforms will do that to you. Everything's temporary when you're surrounded by water and steel." She paused. "But Milwaukee's different. It feels like somewhere I could actually build something lasting." There it was again, that recognition. Like she was speaking a language I'd forgotten I knew. "I get that. Every instrument I restore has been abandoned by someone who gave up on it. Sometimes I think I'm drawn to broken things because I understand what it feels like to be left behind." Her blue eyes sharpened with interest. "Left behind how?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Mrs. Henderson's estate lawyer probably calling about the violin appraisal. I let it go to voicemail. "Work never stops," Cameron said. Something like that. "Actually, would you want to see my workshop? I mean, if you're interested in how the restoration process actually works." She nodded immediately. "I'd love that." My shop occupied the ground floor of a converted brewery building, windows facing north for consistent light. As I unlocked the door, I felt nervous in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Letting someone into my workshop was intimate. These walls held my successes, my failures, my obsessions. Cameron stepped inside and went completely still. Her gaze moved methodically from workbench to wall display, taking in the collection of instruments in various stages of repair. A 1920 Gibson mandolin hung beside a violin, missing its bridge, next to a clarinet with keys that hadn't functioned in decades. "This is incredible," she whispered, approaching a cello I'd been working on for 6 months. "How do you know which ones are worth saving?" "That's the thing. They're all worth saving. It just depends on finding someone willing to invest the time." She turned to look at me, and something passed between us that had nothing to do with instruments. "Show me how it works." I guided her to my main workbench, where the mysterious violin lay partially disassembled. My hands moved automatically, explaining the process while my attention split between the work and her presence beside me. She smelled like lake air and something clean, maybe lavender soap. "The wood tells you everything," I said, running my finger along the violin's edge. "Age, humidity exposure, previous repairs. This one's been through something traumatic." "How can you tell?" "See these stress marks along the ribs? Someone tried to force it open. Recently." Cameron leaned closer, her shoulder brushing mine. "Force it open for what?" I hesitated, remembering the hidden compartment. Something told me to trust her, but something else warned caution. "I'm not sure yet." We spent another hour in the workshop, her asking technical questions that showed she understood engineering principles even in unfamiliar territory. When she picked up a small file and examined its surface, I realized she was evaluating my tools the way I evaluated instruments. "You take care of your equipment. Tools are only as good as their maintenance." Spoken like a true engineer. The afternoon light was fading when she finally said she should go. We walked to the door together, both of us moving slower than necessary. "Cameron." She stopped, hand on the doorframe. "Would you want to walk down to the harbor sometime? I've lived here 8 years and never really looked at the water properly." Her smile was answer enough. 2 days later, we met at Veterans Park as the sun set over Lake Michigan. The December wind cut through our coats, but neither of us suggested going inside. "It's beautiful," I said, watching ice formations along the shoreline. "It's dangerous," Cameron replied. "People see the surface and think they understand what's underneath." Lake Michigan's claimed more ships than most people realize. Sounds familiar. She glanced at me. "Meaning?" "People see a quiet instrument restorer and assume there's nothing complicated going on." We walked the marina path, our conversation meandering between her offshore experiences and my theories about wood aging. When Cameron described the precise calculations required for underwater construction, I found myself genuinely fascinated by her expertise. "Most people find engineering talk boring," she said. "Most people haven't spent years understanding how tiny adjustments can completely change an instrument's voice." We'd stopped walking without realizing it. The harbor spread before us, city lights reflecting on dark water. Cameron's face was serious in the lamplight. "Christina." "Yes?" Instead of answering, she stepped closer and kissed me. Soft at first, tentative, like she was asking permission. When I kissed her back, her arms came around me, and I tasted winter air and possibility. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine. "I wasn't expecting this." "Me neither," I whispered back. But standing there in the cold with Cameron's warmth pressed against me, I realized that some of the best discoveries happen when you're not looking for them. The kiss at the harbor had changed something between us, but neither Cameron nor I acknowledged it directly. Instead, 3 days later, she called with an invitation that felt both casual and loaded with meaning. "I'm making dinner tonight. Real food, not takeout. Interested?" Her lakefront apartment occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. When I arrived, carrying a bottle of wine I'd agonized over selecting, the scent of garlic and herbs filled the space. "Smells incredible," I said, taking in the clean lines of her furniture, the engineering books lined up with military precision. "My grandmother's recipe. She always said good food was the foundation for honest conversation." Cameron moved around her kitchen with the same confident efficiency she brought to everything else. Watching her cook was like watching someone perform a complex technical procedure, every motion purposeful and precise. "Tell me about the platforms," I said, accepting the glass of wine she offered. Her expression grew distant. "Imagine being surrounded by nothing but water and sky for months at a time. The work was incredible, but the isolation—" She paused, stirring the sauce. "You start to forget what it feels like to connect with someone who understands you." "Is that why you came back?" "Partly. I was tired of temporary everything. Temporary assignments, temporary relationships, temporary living situations." She looked directly at me. "I wanted something real." During dinner, she told me stories that painted pictures of life on offshore rigs. The technical challenges, the personalities, the way ocean storms could make sleeping impossible for days. I found myself leaning forward, captivated not just by the stories but by the way she told them, her hands moving to illustrate structural concepts. "Your turn," she said as we finished eating. "What made you choose instrument restoration?" "I fell in love with a damaged piano when I was 12. My music teacher said it was beyond repair, but I couldn't accept that. Something so beautiful was worthless just because it was broken. And I spent 3 months learning how to fix it. When I finally got it working again, the first song it played was the most perfect sound I'd ever heard." Cameron reached across the table and touched my hand. "You save things." "I try to." After dinner, she suggested we walk to the Marcus Center to catch the late chamber music performance. The December night was crisp, our breath visible as we talked about music theory and structural acoustics. At the concert hall, I watched her face during Vivaldi's Winter Concerto, seeing her engineering mind working to understand the mathematical relationships in the music. "The precision is incredible," she whispered during intermission. "Every note has to be exactly right, or the whole piece falls apart. Like building underwater supports." I laughed softly. "Exactly like that." Walking back to her apartment afterward, we moved closer together as the temperature dropped. Our conversation had grown quieter, more personal. When she mentioned feeling lonely on the platforms, I told her about the long hours alone in my workshop, how sometimes I talked to the instruments because the silence became overwhelming. "I never admitted that to anyone before," I said. "I never told anyone about the loneliness either." We'd stopped under a street light, fresh snow beginning to fall around us. Cameron's blonde hair caught the light, her blue eyes serious as she studied my face. "Christina." "Yes?" "I'm going to kiss you again. If that's okay." Instead of answering, I stepped closer. This time, when her lips met mine, there was nothing tentative about it. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me against her as the kiss deepened. I could taste wine and possibility, feel her warmth through our winter coats. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. "Your place or mine?" she asked quietly. "Yours is closer." Back in her apartment, she poured more wine while I examined the engineering texts on her bookshelf. Technical manuals mixed with poetry collections, blueprints stacked beside classical music CDs. Like me, Cameron was someone whose professional precision coexisted with hidden depths. "I have a confession," she said, handing me a glass. "What?" "I've been thinking about kissing you since that first day at the community center." "Just kissing?" Her smile was slow, deliberate. "Not just kissing." I set down my wine and moved closer, my hands finding the buttons of her shirt. "Show me what else you've been thinking about." This time, when she kissed me, we didn't stop. The snow continued falling outside her windows as we discovered each other with the same careful attention we brought to our work. Cameron's touch was patient, thorough, like she was mapping every response. When I whispered her name against her shoulder, she answered with movements that made thinking impossible. Later, wrapped around each other under her down comforter, I traced patterns on her bare back while she played with my hair. "This feels different," she said quietly. "Different how?" "Real, like something I could build a life around." I kissed her shoulder, tasting salt and possibility. Outside, Milwaukee slept under fresh snow. But inside Cameron's apartment, we were wide awake, discovering that some connections are worth the risk of believing in permanence. I woke up in Cameron's bed with winter sunlight streaming through her windows, and the unfamiliar weight of someone else's arm across my waist. For a moment I lay still, processing the shift from 8 years of sleeping, alone to this new reality of shared space and shared warmth. Cameron stirred beside me, her blonde hair messy against the pillow, blue eyes focusing slowly as consciousness returned. "Morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Morning." We looked at each other for a long moment, both of us clearly thinking the same thing. Now what? One night could be explained as impulse, attraction, wine. But waking up together meant acknowledging this was something more. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." I borrowed one of her engineering conference t-shirts, which hung loose on my smaller frame, and watched her move around the kitchen wearing nothing but cotton shorts. Everything about her was efficient, purposeful, even making coffee. But when she handed me my mug, her fingers lingered against mine. "I should probably go home, shower, change clothes," I said. "Should you?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications. I sipped the coffee, buying time to think. My workshop opened at 10. I had 3 restoration consultations scheduled. Normal life waited. "I want to stay," I said finally. "That's the problem." Cameron sat beside me at her kitchen island, our knees touching. "Why is that a problem?" "Because I don't do this. I don't spend nights at women's apartments. I don't skip work to have morning conversations about feelings." "What do you usually do?" "Work. Alone. Keep things simple." She reached over and tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear. Maybe simple isn't always better. That afternoon, Cameron suggested I extend my social circle by meeting her Milwaukee friends. We drove to Brady Street to meet Sarah and Mike at their usual brewery spot. I felt nervous in a way I hadn't experienced since college, like being introduced. As someone's girlfriend carried weight I wasn't prepared for. "So you're the mysterious instrument expert?" Sarah said, sizing me up over her beer. "Cameron's mentioned you exactly once, which means you're either really important or really temporary." "Sarah," Cameron warned. "What?" "I'm just saying, you don't usually introduce us to the women you're dating." Mike, who clearly knew Cameron better, changed the subject to harbor development projects, drawing her into technical conversation, while Sarah continued her interrogation. "How long have you two been together?" "Officially?" "About 12 hours, I answered honestly. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "And she's already bringing you around friends? That's fast, even for Cameron." I glanced across the table at Cameron, who was explaining water displacement calculations to Mike with animated hand gestures. Something about her passion for her work made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Yeah," I said. "It is fast." But watching Cameron in her element, seeing how her face lit up when discussing projects she cared about, I realized fast didn't necessarily mean wrong. Later that evening, back at my workshop, Cameron sat on my workbench while I showed her the violin I'd been restoring. The hidden compartment remained my secret, but everything else about the instrument fascinated her. "The precision required must be incredible," she said, watching me adjust the bridge height by fractions of millimeters. 1 degree off and the whole instrument sounds wrong. Like structural calculations. Exactly. She hopped down from the bench and moved behind me, her hands settling on my shoulders as I worked. Having her there felt natural in a way that surprised me. Usually, my workshop was sacred space, but Cameron's presence enhanced rather than disrupted my concentration. "Christina." "Are you nervous about this? About us?" I set down my tools and turned to face her, terrified. "Good. Me too." She kissed me then, soft and questioning. When I responded by pulling her closer, the kiss deepened into something urgent. Her hands found the hem of my shirt, lifting it over my head as I worked at the buttons of her blouse. "Here?" she asked against my lips. "Here." I cleared space on my workbench, and she lifted me onto it, her mouth trailing down my neck as her fingers traced patterns along my ribs. The workshop around us faded into background, as Cameron's touch became my entire focus. When she whispered my name like a prayer, I understood that this wasn't just physical attraction anymore. This was falling in love. Later, lying on the makeshift bed of painter's tarps and my winter coat, Cameron traced lazy circles on my bare shoulder. "Your friends think we're moving too fast," I said. "My friends worry too much." "Are we moving too fast?" She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers still moving against my skin. "I've spent 3 years being careful. measured, making sure every decision was practical and safe. And now? Now I'm lying naked in an instrument restoration workshop with a woman I met a week ago, and it feels like the most sensible thing I've ever done. I turned in her arms so I could see her face. So what happens next? Next, we figure out if this feeling survives daylight and normal life, and all the complicated stuff that comes after the honeymoon phase. And if it doesn't? Cameron's blue eyes turned serious. Then at least we'll know we tried something real. Outside, Milwaukee settled into another winter night, but inside my workshop, surrounded by broken instruments, waiting to be healed, Cameron and I held each other and pretended the future wasn't scary. But it was about to get much more complicated than either of us imagined. The morning I met Marcus Diaz again started like any other. Cameron had stayed over at my apartment above the workshop, and we were sharing coffee when the moving truck pulled up to the building next door. Through my kitchen window, I watched movers unloading boxes and furniture with practiced efficiency. New neighbor, Cameron observed, following my gaze. That's when I saw him step out of the truck's cab. Tall, dark-haired, wearing the same cocky smile I remembered from 3 years ago when I'd testified against him in court. Marcus Diaz, the man who'd tried to sell forged Stradivarius certificates to collectors, using my reputation as authentication. My coffee mug slipped from suddenly numb fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor. Christina? What's wrong? I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Marcus looked up at my window as if he could sense my stare, and when our eyes met, his smile widened into something predatory. Who is that? Cameron asked, her voice sharp with concern. Someone from my past. Someone who should still be in prison. I told Cameron the whole story while we cleaned up broken ceramic. How Marcus had approached me 2 years into my business, claiming to represent wealthy collectors interested in rare instruments. How he'd used my expertise to create authentication documents for forgeries. How I'd discovered his scheme when a client brought me a verified Amati violin that was obviously modern construction. You turned him in, Cameron said. It wasn't a question. I testified against him. He got 8 years for fraud and forgery. 8 years? But he's out after 3? Good behavior, apparently. Through the window, we watched Marcus directing the movers with casual authority. He'd gained weight in prison, filled out his shoulders, but his movements still carried. That calculated confidence that had first impressed and then terrified me. Could be coincidence, Cameron said, but her engineering mind was already working. What are the odds he'd randomly choose the apartment next to yours in a city of 600,000 people? 0. That afternoon, I tried to focus on work while Cameron researched parole records and apartment rental histories, but concentration was impossible with Marcus living 15 feet away, separated only by brick walls that suddenly felt tissue thin. Around 4, my workshop door chimed. I looked up from the violin I was pretending to examine and saw Marcus standing in my doorway like he belonged there. Hello, Christina. My hands went cold. Marcus. Lovely little shop you have here. He stepped inside without invitation, his gaze cataloging every instrument, every tool, every detail. Business looks good. It is. What do you want? His smile was all teeth, no warmth, just being neighborly. Thought I'd introduce myself to the woman who helped me find religion in prison. I didn't help you find anything. Sure you did. You helped me find patience, determination, the value of long-term planning. He picked up a small tuning fork from my workbench, testing its weight like he was considering purchasing it. The casual intimacy of the gesture made my skin crawl. Put that down. Still jumpy, I see. He replaced the fork exactly where it had been. Don't worry, Christina. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just a reformed man trying to rebuild his life in a city he's grown fond of. Why here? Why this building? Milwaukee's a wonderful place for new beginnings. So many opportunities for someone with my particular skills. The threat in his words was subtle but unmistakable. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Christina? Congratulations on the new relationship. Cameron Ross seems like a lovely woman. I hope nothing unfortunate happens to her. The moment he left, I called Cameron. She arrived within 10 minutes, finding me pacing my workshop like a caged animal. He threatened you, I said without preamble. What exactly did he say? I repeated the conversation word for word. Cameron listened with the focused attention she brought to complex engineering problems, analyzing each detail for structural weaknesses. "We need to document everything," she said finally. "Every interaction, every implied threat. Build a case." A case for what? He didn't actually threaten anything specific. He doesn't have to. His presence here isn't coincidence, and we both know it. That evening, Cameron insisted on staying over again, but neither of us slept well. Every sound from the neighboring apartment made us both tense. Around midnight, we heard Marcus playing music, deliberately loud enough to penetrate our shared wall. Classical pieces, but wrong somehow. Like he was playing them specifically for my benefit. "He knows I'll recognize the pieces," I whispered to Cameron in the darkness. "What are they?" "Compositions that were popular during the period when those forged instruments were supposedly made. He's sending a message." Cameron's arm tightened around me. "What kind of message?" "That he remembers everything, that he hasn't forgotten who cost him 5 years of his life." "Christina." "Yeah? I'm not going anywhere. Whatever he's planning, we'll handle it together." I wanted to believe her. But lying there, listening to Marcus's carefully chosen playlist, I couldn't shake the feeling that Cameron didn't understand what she was promising to face. Marcus Diaz wasn't just a criminal with a grudge. He was intelligent, patient, and now he had intimate access to my daily life. The music continued until dawn, a soundtrack to my growing certainty that our peaceful new relationship was about to become a battlefield. And I was terrified that Cameron would become collateral damage in a war I'd started 3 years ago. The workshop felt wrong the moment I unlocked the door that Tuesday morning. Something in the air, a sense of displacement that made my skin prickle with unease. At first glance, everything appeared normal. My tools lined up with their usual precision, instruments hanging in their designated spots, workbench organized exactly as I'd left it. Then I saw the violin. The mysterious 18th century piece lay in fragments on my main workbench. Its delicate ribs cracked, the fingerboard snapped cleanly in half. 3 months of careful restoration work destroyed in what looked like moments of deliberate vandalism. "Son of a bitch," I whispered, pulling out my phone to photograph the damage before touching anything. But it wasn't just the violin. My prize 1920s Gibson mandolin hung by its strings, body split like someone had taken a hammer to it. The clarinet I'd been rebuilding for the Milwaukee Symphony lay scattered in pieces across my floor. Thousands of dollars in destroyed instruments, each one a piece of musical history reduced to expensive kindling. I called Cameron first, then the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I examined the scene more carefully. No forced entry. Nothing stolen. This wasn't random vandalism. This was personal, surgical, designed to hurt me in the most specific way possible. Cameron arrived before the police, taking one look at the destruction and wrapping me in her arms without a word. I let myself sink into her warmth for exactly 30 seconds, then pulled away to think clearly. "Marcus," I said. "Can you prove it?" Who else would target the instruments specifically? A burglar would have taken the valuable pieces, not destroyed them. Officer Sarah Mitchell arrived 20 minutes later, a woman in her 40s who approached the scene with professional thoroughness. She photographed everything, took detailed notes, asked all the right questions about enemies and insurance coverage. "Any suspects?" she asked. I told her about Marcus, about his recent release and convenient relocation next door. Mitchell wrote it all down with careful attention, but her expression remained neutral. "We'll question Mr. Diaz, but without physical evidence connecting him to the scene, it's going to be difficult to prove anything." After the police left, Cameron and I sat among the wreckage of my workshop, sharing coffee from paper cups because even my usual mugs felt contaminated somehow. "He's escalating," Cameron said quietly. "I know. This isn't going to stop with property damage." I knew that too. But admitting it out loud felt like giving Marcus more power than he'd already taken. Instead, I focused on salvaging what could be saved, sorting fragments by instrument, assessing what might be repairable. "Don't," Cameron said, catching my hands. "Not today. Let me take you somewhere else. I can't just abandon this." "You're not abandoning anything. You're taking a break before you fall apart." Something in her voice, gentle but inflexible, broke through my stubborn determination. She was right. I was operating on adrenaline and fury, which would lead to mistakes I couldn't afford. We spent the rest of the day at her apartment, calling insurance companies and restoration suppliers, trying to assess the financial damage while studiously avoiding discussion of the emotional cost. But whenever Cameron caught me staring out her window toward my building, she would touch my hand or shoulder, grounding me in the present moment. "He wants you scared and isolates," she said as we prepared dinner. "Don't let him have that." "I am scared." "Good. Scared keeps you careful. But isolated would make you vulnerable." That evening, as we tried to pretend normalcy was possible, I found myself studying Cameron's face in the kitchen light. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a stranger with calloused hands and interesting eyes. Now she was the person standing between me and complete panic. "What if he goes after you next?" I asked quietly. "Let him try." "Cameron, I'm serious. Marcus is dangerous, and I dragged you into this by getting involved with you." She set down her wine and moved to stand directly in front of me. "First, you didn't drag me into anything. I chose to be here. Second, I'm not some delicate flower who needs protection from angry ex-cons. But I am? You're the target. There's a difference." Before I could argue, she kissed me, soft but insistent, reminding me that intimacy was still possible even in the middle of chaos. When I responded, pulling her closer, the kiss deepened into something desperate, like we were trying to prove connection could survive destruction. "Bedroom," I whispered against her mouth. "You sure?" "I need to feel something besides fear." She led me to her bed, and we made love with an intensity that surprised both of us. Every touch felt urgent, necessary, like we were claiming something Marcus couldn't reach. Cameron's hands on my skin, her whispered name in my ear. The way. She held me afterward, like I was something precious and breakable. "It's going to be okay," she murmured into my hair. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know what it takes to build something that lasts, and this is worth building." Lying in the darkness of Cameron's bedroom, listening to her steady breathing, I wanted to believe that love could be stronger than revenge, that what we were creating together could withstand whatever Marcus had planned. But at 3 a.m, when classical music began playing again from next door, deliberately loud, enough to penetrate Cameron's walls, I understood that Marcus wasn't finished with psychological warfare. He was just getting started. And the next phase would test everything Cameron and I thought we knew about trust, protection, and the price of standing together against someone who had nothing left to lose. The morning after the classical music harassment, I couldn't stop thinking about that mysterious violin. While Cameron made breakfast, I sat at her kitchen table sketching what I remembered of the hidden compartment's contents. The parchment I'd glimpsed before Linda's interruption. Something about it had looked familiar, but I'd been too startled to examine it properly. "I need to go back to the workshop," I said. "Absolutely not. Not alone. The violin pieces. I need to check if the compartment survived the damage." Cameron set down her coffee mug with deliberate precision. "What compartment?" I told her about the hidden hinges, the rolled parchment, the reason. Mrs. Henderson's violin had felt significant from the beginning. Cameron listened with the systematic attention she brought to complex engineering problems, asking technical questions about construction methods and concealment techniques. "You think Marcus knows about it? Why else target that specific instrument so thoroughly? But if he destroyed it to hide evidence, then whatever was inside is gone. Maybe. Or maybe he was trying to get me to reveal what I'd found." An hour later, we stood in my ransacked workshop, both of us wearing gloves Cameron had purchased at the hardware store. The violin's remains lay scattered across my workbench, but the main body section remained partially intact. With careful fingers, I probed the damaged ribs, feeling for the tiny hinges. They were bent, twisted, but still functional. The hidden compartment had survived Marcus's assault. "Got it," I whispered, working the mechanism open. Inside lay the same rolled parchment, plus something new. A small digital storage device, modern and completely out of place in an 18th century instrument. "What the hell?" Cameron breathed. I photographed everything before touching it, then carefully extracted both items. The parchment was a list of names and dates spanning 3 years, ending just before Marcus's arrest. But the storage device was the real revelation. Cameron's laptop revealed files containing detailed records of Marcus's entire forgery operation. Not just the cases that had led to his conviction, but dozens of additional fraudulent sales. Evidence of international buyers, money laundering through shell companies, connections to stolen artifacts that had never been reported. "This is enough to put him away for 20 years, Cameron said, scrolling through financial records. But why would someone hide it in the violin? Someone who wanted insurance but couldn't risk keeping the evidence anywhere obvious. I studied the handwriting on the parchment. Neat, feminine, familiar somehow. Then it clicked. Mrs. Henderson's daughter, Elizabeth. She worked at the gallery where Marcus operated. She was gathering evidence? And when things got dangerous, she hid it in her mother's violin collection. Maybe she was planning to come forward, but... Cameron pulled up the news archives on her laptop. Elizabeth Henderson had died in a car accident 6 months after Marcus's trial. Single vehicle crash on a rainy night, ruled accidental. Convenient timing, Cameron muttered. Very convenient. We spent the next hour copying the files to multiple storage devices, making sure the evidence was preserved before deciding what to do with it. But our careful planning was interrupted by footsteps on the stairs leading to my workshop. Marcus appeared in my doorway like he belonged there, his presence filling the space with casual menace. This time, he wasn't smiling. "Working late, Christina?" My hand moved instinctively to protect the laptop, but Marcus noticed the motion immediately. His gaze sharpened as he took in the scattered violin pieces, the evidence spread across my workbench. "Interesting project," he said, stepping closer. "Restoration work can be so revealing, can't it?" "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want you to be very careful about what you think you've discovered." Elizabeth Henderson was a troubled young woman who let her imagination run wild. Was she? Car accidents happen to people who don't pay attention to road conditions. The threat was unmistakable now. Cameron moved to stand beside me, her engineering background evident in her assessment of angles and escape routes. "You're threatening us," she said calmly. "I'm sharing local history. Milwaukee can be dangerous for people who don't understand their place in it." Marcus reached toward the workbench, but Cameron's voice stopped him. "Touch anything on that table and I'll break your hand." Her tone was conversational, matter-of-fact, like she was discussing weather patterns. But something in her posture, the way she shifted her weight, convinced Marcus she meant every word. "Ms. Ross, isn't it? The engineer. You should know that structures can be very unstable when they're not properly supported. I also know that badly designed systems tend to collapse under their own weight." They stared at each other for a long moment, two people calculating risk and advantage. Finally, Marcus smiled his predatory smile and stepped back. "Enjoy your evening, ladies. Try not to work too late. You never know what might happen in an empty building after dark." He left as suddenly as he'd arrived, but his presence lingered like smoke. Cameron immediately began gathering the evidence, moving with efficient purpose. "We're not staying here tonight," she said. "Running won't solve anything. Strategic withdrawal, there's a difference." As we packed everything into Cameron's car, my phone rang. Officer Mitchell's number. "Miss Evans?" We questioned Marcus Diaz about the break-in. He has an alibi for Tuesday morning. Security footage shows him at a job interview across town. "What kind of job interview?" "Private security company." Apparently, Mr. Diaz has excellent references from his time in correctional facilities. Cameron and I looked at each other. Marcus wasn't just threatening us. He was positioning himself professionally to have access to buildings, security systems, personal information. "Officer Mitchell, there's something else you need to know." "What's that?" "I've found evidence linking Marcus to additional crimes, serious ones. Bring it to the station tomorrow morning. We'll have a detective review everything." After hanging up, Cameron started her car with grim determination. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Marcus can't find us while we figure out how to end this permanently." As we drove through Milwaukee's empty streets, the evidence of Marcus's expanded. Criminal network secure in Cameron's laptop bag, I realized we'd crossed a line. This wasn't about harassment or property damage anymore. This was about survival. And Marcus Diaz wasn't the only one capable of long-term planning. Cameron drove us to a hotel near the airport, paying cash and using her own name, while I waited in the car with the evidence. The anonymity of the generic business hotel felt safer than anywhere Marcus might expect to find us. Detective Rodriguez will meet us at the station at 8, Cameron said, reviewing her notes as we settled into the sterile room. I've organized the files chronologically, cross-referenced the financial records with the victim list. Her engineering mind had transformed Elizabeth Henderson's desperate evidence gathering into a prosecutable case. Watching her work, I felt a surge of gratitude mixed with something deeper. Love, maybe, or recognition that this woman would stand between me and danger without hesitation. You don't have to do this, I said quietly. Yes, I do. Why? She looked up from her laptop, blue eyes serious in the lamplight. Because you matter to me. Because Marcus is a predator who won't stop until someone stops him. Because Elizabeth Henderson deserves justice. At 7:30 the next morning, we arrived at the Milwaukee Police Department with our evidence carefully organized in multiple formats. Detective Rodriguez was a compact woman in her 50s who listened to our story with professional skepticism that gradually shifted to interest as she reviewed the files. This is extensive, she admitted, scrolling through financial records. If authentic, it connects Diaz to international art fraud, money laundering, possibly accessory to theft of cultural artifacts. What about Elizabeth Henderson's death? I asked. We'll request the accident report be reviewed, but don't expect miracles. 3-year-old single vehicle crashes are hard to prove as anything but accidents. Rodriguez studied the photographs I'd taken of the violin's hidden compartment, asking technical questions about the construction methods and timeline of concealment. Ms. Evans, I need to ask, why didn't you report finding this evidence immediately? I didn't fully understand what I'd found until Marcus started threatening us. The pieces didn't come together until yesterday. And now that they have? Now I want him stopped permanently. Rodriguez made copies of everything, promising to have the digital forensics team verify the authenticity of the files. But as we prepared to leave, she pulled me aside. Ms. Evans, I have to advise caution. If Diaz realizes you've found this evidence, he may escalate beyond property damage and intimidation. What kind of escalation? Elizabeth Henderson kind. We spent the day at Cameron's apartment, trying to maintain normal routines while monitoring news and police communications. Around 3, my phone rang with an unknown number. Christina? It's Mrs. Henderson's estate lawyer. There's been a break-in at the warehouse where we're storing her remaining collection. What was taken? Nothing, as far as we can tell. But someone went through all the instrument cases systematically. Police said it looked like they were searching for something specific. Cameron and I looked at each other. Marcus was hunting for additional evidence, probably realizing we'd found something significant. Sir, I need to tell you something about that violin in the collection. After explaining about the hidden compartment and its contents, the lawyer was quiet for a long moment. Elizabeth came to see me 2 weeks before she died, he said finally. She seemed frightened, kept asking about safety deposit boxes and legal protections for whistleblowers. I thought she was being paranoid. She wasn't. No, she wasn't. That evening, as we tried to focus on dinner and television, Cameron's building's fire alarm began blaring. We grabbed essential items and joined other residents evacuating to the parking area. Fire trucks arrived within minutes, but no smoke was visible from outside. False alarm, the fire captain announced after 20 minutes. Sensor malfunction in the basement, you can return to your units. But as we rode the elevator back to Cameron's floor, she grabbed my arm. The door. Her apartment door stood slightly ajar, though we'd locked it carefully before evacuating. Cameron pulled out her phone to call police, but I stopped her. Wait. We approached carefully, listening for sounds of occupancy. The apartment was empty, but someone had been inside. Nothing stolen, nothing obviously disturbed, but both of us could sense the violation immediately. He wanted us to know he could get in, I said. How? This building has security. He works for a private security company now. Access to buildings, knowledge of alarm systems. That's when we found it. A single photograph placed precisely in the center of Cameron's coffee table. Elizabeth Henderson's car wrapped around a tree, taken from crime scene documentation that should have been confidential. The message was unmistakable. He's done playing games, Cameron said quietly. So are we. I called Detective Rodriguez, explaining about the break-ins and the photograph. She promised increased patrols and expedited processing of the evidence we'd provided, but her tone suggested she understood the timeline had accelerated. Ms. Evans, I'm going to be direct. If our digital forensics team confirms this evidence is authentic, we'll have enough to arrest Diaz tomorrow. But until then, you and Miss Ross should consider staying somewhere he can't find you. How long for the forensics? 6 to 8 hours. Maybe less if we prioritize it. Cameron was already packing while I finished the call, but as we prepared to leave her compromised apartment, her phone rang. Miss Ross, this is building security. We have Marcus Diaz in the lobby asking to see you. He says you're expecting him. Cameron's jaw tightened. We're not expecting him. Don't let him up. He's quite insistent. Says it's about Ms. Evans and some missing property. Through Cameron's window, we could see Marcus's car in the visitor parking area. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was announcing his presence, making sure we knew he was in control. Tell him we'll meet him in the lobby in 10 minutes, Cameron said. Like hell, I protested after she hung up. Christina, we can't run forever. And we can't let him dictate the terms of every encounter. So what's your plan? Cameron's smile was sharp, calculating. I'm going to remind Mr. Diaz that engineers understand leverage better than anyone. As we rode the elevator down to face Marcus, I realized that my quiet, methodical girlfriend had been planning this confrontation since the moment we'd found Elizabeth Henderson's evidence. And Marcus Diaz was about to discover that threatening an engineer's loved ones was a fatal miscalculation. Marcus stood in the lobby like he owned the building, hands in his pockets, that predatory smile fixed in place. But when Cameron and I stepped off the elevator together, something in our unified presence made his expression flicker with uncertainty. Ladies. So good of you to join me. What do you want, Marcus? I asked. I want you to return what belongs to me. Elizabeth Henderson took something that wasn't hers to take. Cameron stepped slightly forward, her engineering background evident in the way she assessed angles and positions. Elizabeth's dead. Whatever she took died with her. Did it? Marcus's gaze moved between us, calculating. I think you found something interesting in that violin. Something that could cause me considerable inconvenience. Like evidence of your international art fraud network? I asked. His smile disappeared completely. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Christina. Elizabeth learned that lesson too late. Are you confessing to murder? Cameron asked conversationally. I'm stating facts about consequences. Bad things happen to people who don't understand their limitations. That's when I heard it. The subtle electronic beep from Cameron's phone. She'd been recording the entire conversation. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice steady, you made a mistake. What mistake? You assumed we were amateurs. Cameron's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Detective Rodriguez's number, right on schedule. Ms. Ross? Our forensics team has verified the authenticity of the evidence Miss Evans provided. We're prepared to move forward with arrest warrants. Cameron put the call on speaker so Marcus could hear every word. Additionally, Mr. Diaz's conversation in your lobby has been very illuminating. We'll need him to come in for questioning immediately. Through the lobby windows, we could see police cars pulling into the parking area. Marcus's head swiveled between the phone and the approaching officers, his careful composure finally cracking. You set me up. We gave you enough rope, Cameron said. You hanged yourself. This isn't over. Actually, it is. Detective Rodriguez entered with 2 uniformed officers, moving with decisive authority. Marcus Diaz, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. We'll probably add threatening witnesses and harassment charges. As they cuffed Marcus, he looked directly at me. You think this solves everything? I'm not the only one who knows about Elizabeth's little insurance policy. Maybe not, I said. But you're the only one stupid enough to confess on a recorded phone call. The officers led Marcus away, and suddenly the lobby felt 20 degrees warmer. Cameron wrapped her arms around me, and I realized I was shaking. It's over, she whispered. Is it really? Detective Rodriguez approached with paperwork and reassurances. The recorded confession, combined with Elizabeth Henderson's evidence, would likely result in federal charges and a much longer prison sentence. The international connections would attract FBI attention, ensuring Marcus faced consequences beyond state jurisdiction. What about his threats about other people being involved? I asked. We'll investigate fully. But without Marcus's freedom and resources, his network loses its primary coordinator. 3 months later, spring had returned to Milwaukee, and Cameron was officially moving her belongings into my apartment above the workshop. The insurance settlement had allowed me to replace the destroyed instruments and upgrade my security system, but more importantly, Marcus's arrest had restored my sense of safety. Where does this go? Cameron asked, holding up a box labeled engineering texts. Wherever you want. This is your home now too. She set down the box and pulled me into her arms, the same way she had that first night we'd spent together. But now the gesture carried the weight of shared experience, proven trust, love tested by actual danger. Are you sure about this? She asked. Living together, making this official, all of it? I'm sure about you. Everything else we'll figure out together. The Milwaukee Harbor Development Project had offered Cameron a permanent position as lead engineer, which meant no more temporary assignments, no more living out of suitcases. We were both finally ready to build something lasting. That evening, as we arranged furniture and debated wall space for her blueprint collection, Cameron suggested we walk down to the harbor where we'd shared our first kiss. The same route, the same timing, but everything transformed by the knowledge that we'd survived something that could have destroyed us. I have something to ask you, she said as we reached the spot where streetlight reflected on dark water. She pulled a small box from her jacket pocket, and my heart stopped. Cameron. Christina Evans, you're the most courageous, stubborn, brilliant woman I've ever met. You save broken things for a living, but somehow you saved me too. She opened the box to reveal a simple silver band with a small diamond that caught the harbor lights. Will you marry me? I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The mysterious violin, the hidden evidence, the terror of Marcus's threats. The way Cameron had stood beside me through all of it without wavering. Yes, I said, and she slid the ring onto my finger with hands that were perfectly steady. When she kissed me this time, it tasted like promises and permanence, like all the music I'd ever restored combined into one perfect chord. Behind us, Milwaukee's skyline glittered with lights, and somewhere in federal prison, Marcus Diaz was learning that some people are stronger when they stand together than they ever were alone. But that was his lesson to learn. Mine was already complete, wearing Cameron's engagement ring and planning a future that no one could threaten or take away. Because love, it turns out, is the only thing that gets stronger when you test it under pressure.